Good morning, everybody. We hope you had a nice weekend. Today, we're going to be talking about the distance learning playbook for today's professional learning opportunity. Last time we met, we went through a basic overview of the book, what you should expect, and some of the key elements of it. Today, we're going to go through modules 9, 1, and 2. It's going to be broken up with some chats, some just personal feedback, and some breakout rooms that will be facilitated by your principals. As we do this, we just ask that you abide by certain expectations for today. These expectations are pretty simple. Keep your camera on and your microphone on mute unless you're asked to unmute. That's basically just so we don't have a lot of feedback coming through the computers. If there's anything that you would like to discuss or say, please feel free to unmute and jump on in or put it in the chat. Colleagues during this presentation, I could give you great information. Gosh, we know that the books gives you great information, but the best conversations and the best ideas are with your colleagues. So take part in all breakout rooms, have fun, talk, see where they take you, and keep all posts and conversations positive. I know we're all under a lot of stress right now and the unknown is looming. But if we all keep our conversations positive and try to find solutions to what is worrying us, that's a great place to start. Today we're going to start with Module 9, Learning, Distance, or Otherwise. Yeah, I know we're going out of order, but that's okay. A lot of what we need to talk about is in case of the hybrid model or in case, fingers crossed this doesn't happen, but if there was an outbreak of cluster cases and we'd have to go virtual, learning, distance or otherwise, is really important to talk about first. Our learning intentions for today, the two things that you really should focus on, I'm learning to consider experiences with distance learning as a way to bring schools back better than before. And also I'm learning about the ways to improve the schooling experience, whether distance, blended, or physically together. We're going to be able to tell how successful we are today by this success criteria. Now, the learning intentions page and this success criteria page are things that you will see throughout all the modules of the distance learning playbook. So the success criteria is very simple. I can make a physical school better for everyone. I can make distance learning better for teachers. I can make distance learning better for students. And I can learn from crises and improve teaching and learning. These are things that we all want. Sometimes they're a bit overwhelming, so that's why we're going to go through them today. So what I'd like you to do is pause, ponder, put your pen to paper for a second while your principals pause this chat so you can take a chat. What did you learn from the crisis teaching that will be useful in the future? So what I would like your principals to do is to pause this here and allow you to take a few moments and put in your biggest lesson from distance learning or crisis learning, because what we did in the spring was not distance. It was doing the best we could with what we had. And granted, you guys did a really good job with that, but what was the most important thing that you learned? So pause here. Okay, so now let's go over some things that we learned while distance learning, or crisis teaching, if you will. I know we talked a little bit about this last time we met, but we're just going to go over this very, very briefly. You just discussed a lot of different lessons that you personally learned, and now we're going to focus on some more that the book brings up. So focus on what students know and don't know. Only teach the things that they don't know. As teachers, a lot of times we find ourselves going over things in class that the students may already have had access to, and we spend that time on that. With distance learning, the time isn't the same. Your online connection is a little bit different. So only teach what they don't know. Use the technique of mini lessons. Bring in social media or other internet sites. Make it project-based and give them new ways to practice. Give them lots of feedback. Let them use technology in ways that are exciting for them, and worry more about things that maybe parents are least likely to be able to help with. Also, we need to address social and emotional needs of students and educators. The kids weren't the only ones that were stuck at home during this time, so were we. So there's lots of different feelings, lots of adjustments that went on just for the fact that everything was turned upside down overnight. So those are things that are important. Again, I talked a lot the other day about relationships, and this is that. Not only relationships with your students, but relationships with your colleagues as well. Again, prioritize skills and concepts that families are least likely to be able to help with, and provide timely feedback to fuel the momentum of learning. There's nothing more frustrating than waiting and waiting and waiting for feedback on something. I remember this as a student. If I turned in a paper, I hated waiting 3 weeks to get the paper back. I just wanted to know how I did. The kids feel the same way. That doesn't change. I think you all, were in that situation at one point or another. Create lots of opportunities for social interaction. For some kids, this might be the only interaction that they have with their friends and with other classmates at all. I know personally, my 3 children have not been around their friends since March, and that's hard for them. So this is a great opportunity. My son's super excited to go back to school, and he's not one that ever really loved school to begin with. So that's a nice change, but I'm sure if he's feeling this way, so are all of our kids. We also talked about this the other day, that ineffective approaches to learning are ineffective in digital spaces too. Now that's not a all the time thing. Sometimes we saw that some things that work online didn't necessarily work in the classroom. Sometimes kids have more confidence behind the computer. There are special circumstances where this does not hold true, but in large part, if there's something that doesn't work in your classroom, the chances are it probably won't work in the digital environment either. We also want to make learning better for teachers too, whether in distance learning, physical school, or something in between. Like I said, this is an adjustment for all of us. We're trying to figure it out as we go, trying to make the best of a situation that is unknown to us and move on. So, how do we assess our impact from a distance? This is a great question. The thing is, and you have to remember, that you are such an important factor in that classroom. When you come in front of those kids, they're happy to see you. Teaching is not just a profession, it's who you are, it's what you do, it's an action. So we look at these things, and these are conversations that we need to have. How do we assess our impact? How do we, how do groups of teachers evaluate, discuss, and work together? How do we create these opportunities when they're not necessarily as easy as they were before? How do we discover ways to enhance the collective efficacy of all, now with the parents? Schools are a hub of response and recovery for a community. We know this. You saw this as we gave out lunches, as we provided internet services, as we gave out Chromebooks. It's a place where emotional recovery and support happens. Just think of all our guidance counselors and how many real conversations you've had with our students. Sometimes it's their safe place. So there's lots of great things that we've done as a school. We've been there for our kids. We've been there for their families. We are what the community looks to in times of crisis. So share these stories. Have these conversations. Let everybody know what it is that you've done and what your students have done and that were successful during this time. Welcome to Module 2. Today, we're going to be talking about, our screen's a little off, it's okay. Today we're going to be talking about classroom norms, routines, and procedures useful in distance learning, also about creating virtual and distance learning environments. Our success criteria, this is all screwy for us today. Our success criteria is that I know my students' names and interests. We all know that that's important, whether they're in front of us in person or on a computer screen. I can evaluate my website to determine if it's considerate, so think about Google Classroom and how many different things that you're asking the students to do, how many different places you're asking them to go. I can teach organizational and procedural routines, which is so important. I can identify synchronous distance learning classroom expectations. I could develop class agreements, and I can establish norms for students. Okay, we're going to jump right into a chat. So, what is your favorite aspect of the first days of school? So, I want you to answer this from the teacher perspective because there's always something that everybody enjoys uh, and looks forward to. There's one part of that first day of school that everybody loves. It's all different, but I want to see what you have to say. So, the principals will pause here and you can engage in the chat for a few minutes. There's lots of exciting things about the first days of school. Seeing colleagues you haven't seen in a while, seeing the students from last year who always loved your class come stop by to say hello, seeing the new personalities in your class this year. This year's no different. It's the same types of things, just possibly a little bit different of an environment. Mary Poppins once said, well begun is half done, and she's right. So when we talk about a distance learning environment or a face-to-face one, you want to make sure you're starting off the year on the right foot. And what exactly does that mean? Being proactive, not reactive, is key to good classroom management in a virtual environment. What is your philosophy of teaching and learning in a virtual space? Now, I'm not going to make you do this, but it's not a bad idea to have some sort of philosophy of teaching and learning available in your classroom. And when I say classroom, I mean your physical, and I also mean your virtual classroom. Make it a tab on your Google Classroom. Let the kids put it someplace where they can see it. No more than 100 words. You could also be creative. You could do it as a tweet, 6-word memoir, something like that. Something that's succinct and easy for them to see. When you do this, you're setting up a standard for your students. They know what you expect. They know your view on education and your expectations of them. Unstated norms in the virtual classroom will evolve for better or worse. That is absolutely true. And what's interesting about norms is that they kind of just develop. Okay, groups of people interact based on norms that are agreed upon. And when they're not agreed upon, they kind of develop on their own. So think about how you interact with people at work versus people you may have gone to college with, or your in-laws, or a family friend. Those interactions are all different. They know you in a different light because of the norms that are either stated or unstated. When you have a classroom that is online, or you have a classroom that's full of students in front of you, it's very important to set up rules and procedures. Those are going to be your norms. Set up norms and class agreements for your virtual learning classroom. How are they supposed to interrupt respectfully if there's a question? How are they supposed to participate in a class conversation? These are things that if you do not set up and you do not practice with your students, they'll find a way to do it anyway. So make sure that you have something in mind, maybe possibly written down and posted also again in your classroom and online, that is very indicative of what you want your classroom to look like. Don't assume that your students know everything there is to know about virtual etiquette. Don't assume that they know what you would expect of them. Make sure your expectations are clear. The fewer the number works better. It's less for the kids to focus on. It's more for them to have clarity. Co-construct them with students if you would like to. Come up with your own ideas. How do you guys think it would be if we put in the chat if you had a question? Would you rather unmute and say, Mrs. Waslick, I have a question? Have those conversations. This way it's a comfortable environment for everybody. State them positively, okay? Don't say, no interrupting. Nobody wants to be talk to like that. If you have a question, please unmute and say, Mrs. Wozliak, I have a question. Or please type in the chat, I have a question. Can you answer it at a good time? Something like that. So if you have these conversations and you state all of these expectations positively, it puts the atmosphere in the room as a very warm atmosphere. Make them specific. Um, Agreements that are specific in nature state explicitly what's expected behavior should be, and that helps kids self-regulate. They know what they should be doing. They also know what they shouldn't be doing. And again, post them, put them someplace where the kids can see them. And with anything else, expectations are better met when taught. Practice them. When you walk into the room, what should you do? Where should you put your books? What should be on your desk? What should not be on your desk? Practice them. Have them do these things. If you're turning in homework, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to abide by social distancing. Show the students, let them do it. I went to a training once where the teachers actually got together and they took pictures of different classrooms, and what they did was they showed like what it looks like ready to learn, and it was a student sitting with a notebook on their desk, and then not ready to learn. It was like a kid with his hat on and like eating a bagel and sprawled out all over the desk, but it wasn't kids, it was all the different teachers, and the kids loved it. They ate it up. But that's one way to do it. Put pictures on the wall. This is with my kids at home, we have a playroom, and what I've done now is, this is what this should look like. So when they put their toys away, they model the behavior, or they model what they see on the wall, and things get put back the way I would like them to. You have to make it explicit, and it doesn't matter if they're 5 or 18, they still need these visual and constant reminders of what is expected of them. Now, when you're talking about the virtual environment, there's also some things that you need to set up that are very different than what you need to do in the classroom. In the classroom, you can have students say, okay, when so-and-so is talking, I would like you to look at so-and-so, acknowledge what they're saying. The virtual environment's a little bit different, but have the students keep the cameras on. Make sure that they know that, attire appropriate for school is what they should be wearing. There should not be anybody else in their camera. This is a one-on-one learning environment. Also, that their microphone should be off, much like we asked you to do today. This way, background noise is minimized. Now, the mute button is a very touchy thing. It's useful, but it can also be seen as punitive. So make sure that when you do it, you make sure, if you have to, that it is appropriate use of the mute button. Okay, so let's pause for a moment. Again, I will always say that the best ideas come from sharing and collaboration. So in the chat, what are 3 agreements that you want to co-construct with your students, either in the virtual environment or in the face-to-face one, or even perhaps both? So I'm going to ask the principals to pause here to give you time to write some in the chat and have some reflection on that once that is finished. It's important to identify expectations for synchronous learning and then teach them. Like I said before, having these agreements and setting up the norms for your classroom are important. Keep in mind, every student situation is different. So if one of your expectations is to have a learning environment that's quiet and free of distraction, that's a great expectation to have. However, that might not be possible for all our students. Some have brothers and sisters who are doing the same thing at the same time with limited space. Some kids may be sitting in a very strange space to you, maybe in a larger bedroom closet or on the porch, where you don't think that's the best learning environment, but that's someplace to them that's safe, quiet, and free of distractions. So keep those things in mind as you watch your kids on these cameras and interact with them. What you may think is the best environment has to have a little bit of flexibility. Also, even though these environments may seem strange to you, please do not question the students in front of other students about why they're sitting in a closet, why they're on the porch, why are you in this strange area that you don't think is the most conducive to learning. Students have lots of different things going on in their households that doesn't need to be shared with the entire class. Fisher, Fry, and Hattie really thought of everything. They came up with a lot of different questions that your students might have as you're progressing through the year. Right here is a list of questions about getting ready for the class meeting. Make sure that there's a pre-class preparation activity so that everybody will be ready to learn. So for example, if you remember last time we met, I had a do now that we put up on the screen. So it was there as students started entering the class, entering the meet, so that there was something for them to do. Again, that should be the same as what the students are doing in your classroom. That's just a good teaching technique. Get your kids in, get them ready to go. Sometimes you can grade it. You don't always have to, but it's a good way to formatively assess your students. So have something like that up. Or, we talked about Bitmoji classrooms. That's a good place to stick a Bitmoji classroom, make something in the background, put up a fun fact of the day, put up a question, something that can engage kids in conversation as soon as the class starts to build those relationships. But these are questions students are going to have. During class meetings, here's some more questions and some ideas of what norms you can set up for your students. I really like the second to last one, turn off notifications from email and social media so you aren't distracted. A study done at Oxford said secondary school teachers lose 17.2 minutes of teaching time every day to disruptions caused by social media or smart devices. That equates to 86 minutes every week over 11 days of teaching over the course of the year. So it's significant. So making rules, and I'm not saying not to embrace the cell phones because there's plenty of awesome things that you can do with them, but set up rules, set up expectations, and stick to them because that's a lot of time over the course of the year that students miss out on in their classrooms. Whether you're face-to-face or online, at the close of each class meeting, you should be reviewing the goals that you set every day. Did you achieve them? Go back to your learning intentions. Go back to your success indicators, your objectives. Did we hit them? What do we still need to work on? Where do we need to go? Ask your students that question. That gives you a really good indication on how successful they're feeling in that class for that day and possibly what you need to tweak for tomorrow. Make sure that you know how to access assigned learning tasks for the next meeting. That is something that you need to make sure those students know every day because I know I heard it all last spring. I don't know where it is. We don't know where to find it. This teacher doesn't have it up. Yes, they do. You all did. It's there, but sometimes kids just don't know where to do it. So again, practice these things with the students in the classroom. Go over them, show them before they leave the room. You're going to go to classwork, or you're going to go to assignments, you're going to go to the stream. This is where it is. This is how you do it. Make sure that it is explicitly laid out for them. It's always a good idea too to have like a cheat sheet of sorts. Assessments can be found here, homework can be found here, important class updates can be found here, and really specify it to your class so that there is no confusion for your students, because we all know how frustrating it is to get onto somebody's website to try to find a basic piece of information and have it be hidden or so out of view that you can't find it. Adults seem to have more patience with that than kids do. So we need to make sure that things are very, very clear. Okay, for video chats, there's a lot of things that take a back seat right now. Movement in the classroom, so important for students. So things that you want to do is you might want to stop and take big brain breaks. Stand up, have them do something. Play Simon Says. And I had my 17-year-olds play Simon Says. They thought I was a dork, but they did it and they had a good time. So it doesn't matter if they're 5 or 17, it's something that they'll laugh. And they might be a little embarrassed, but it doesn't matter. Have them get up and move. Sitting behind the computer all day is difficult. Okay. Have them do some sort of activity, video chat, have them listen to something, watch a video. Edpuzzle's a great tool for that. There's lots of good videos on YouTube that you could upload to Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle has tons of their own. And have them engage in conversation. So all through today, I've tried to have you either go into chats with your colleagues or with your principals and have meaningful conversations, something that you could walk away and say, oh, yeah, you know, so and so said something. Never thought of it that way before. So, walking away with good information. You want the kids to be able to have those opportunities too. Just because they're not getting in groups physically doesn't mean they can't get in groups online. When they're all online in the same place, that might be the only time that they're together as a whole group. So, make the most of those conversations, make the most of those opportunities. Keep families in mind, set up a considerate LMS, and provide schedules so they can plan. So it's a great idea to put schedules up on the stream on your Google Classroom. You know, this is A cohort day, B cohort day, or you know, morning session, afternoon session. This is what it's going to look like this week. Students will have an idea, parents will be able to plan. I have 3 children myself, I've mentioned before. All 3 have a different schedule. The flow charts and planners I have right now would blow your mind. So parents feel this way. They're overwhelmed too. We're overwhelmed as educators. I'm sure that the students are overwhelmed and excited and trying to figure this all out. So there's no need to really overcomplicate things. If you put up a schedule, set up your Google Classroom with tools that you plan on using, and like I said the other day, you shouldn't have to use 20 tools to get through virtual and distance learning. Find things that you like, use them, and use them so that the students can achieve. You don't have to use them just to use them. Use them because they serve your purpose. A considerate website is accessible to children and families. So the color, background, size of text is important. You don't want anybody struggling to read what's on your slide. Operable, keyboard driven. Sometimes if a kid is working on a phone or an iPad, things are different, but they're all going to have the Chromebook, so anything that's keyboard driven is preferable. Understandable, developmentally appropriate. So what I'm saying about that is that you also want to make sure that whatever site that you're using, if you plan on integrating technology to it, is appropriate for the grade level that you're teaching. You're not going to use insanely complicated things for a K1. Whereas, you know, as they get older, you might be able to incorporate other sites in different ways in your lessons. And robust, the information is useful and compatible. My biggest frustration with this, and please excuse all my personal stories, but my son had, he used Google Classroom last year, and 50% of the time, the things that the teacher put up, we couldn't get to work on the computer. And then she would say, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to do it. And that was everybody's computer. This was the experience we had across the board. And that really made him upset because that really meant that what he had to do on these assignments didn't really matter. That's what it said to him. So maybe it did. But if she was so quick to throw it away, he was like, well, if I didn't have to do yesterday's, why do I have to do today's? So it's important that everything, you know, is operable, that it's relevant to the kids, and they understand why it is they're doing this. Also think about what questions are students and families likely to ask. So for example, this is actually a chart that you will find in the book. And it's got good questions in it. You know, how do I submit work? How do I retrieve graded work? How do I contact teacher for help? How do I get help? How do I get help if I need help with the computer? These are all questions that will come up. So maybe it's something that you put together on a sheet for your Google Classroom or something that you send home with the students. Frequently asked questions or likely to be asked questions, and put your answers, because your answer may be different than the teacher next door to you. So these will help students adapt to this type of environment very easily and cut down on the number of emails you're likely to get from students and parents. Okay, so the first day of school are exciting ones. We know this. What you should be doing is greeting students by name as they arrive and make those first connections. I don't care if they're walking into your physical classroom or coming into your Google Classroom and your Google Meets. You know, that's the nice thing about Google Meets. On day one, they're all identified for you. It's easy to greet them by name. So say hello to them as they pop into your classroom. Personalize the space for them. Now, I'm not saying you have to personalize whatever you're standing in front of for the students in the virtual classroom, but maybe having a slide up with that class's name, or again, that Bitmoji classroom for that class, or something maybe referencing something you discussed yesterday. Make it special for them too. Again, forming relationships is so important to this. Learn about student interests to make early connections with them. So if you have students that are playing sports, and now I know that's a little iffy, but some of them are doing conditioning. Some of them like football. Some of them are baseball fans. Some of them are basketball fans. Talk to them about the things that they like. What do they want to do when they graduate? Where do they want to go? How do these things change? How is what's going on in your class relevant to the people that they are going to become when they leave us? Okay, so now it's time for a breakout room. So this is what I would like you to do. I want you to talk about with your colleagues, and your principals will determine how you're going to break this up. But what routines will you use the first week of school to learn your students' names and interests? How are you going to incorporate them? How is it different from what you did last year on day one to what you're doing this year in day one, with some students at home, some students in the building, or some students completely virtual? The breakout room assignments are here. Okay, your principals will tell you how you're going to break up into those rooms, and then please go back and answer that question. Again, what routines will you use during the first week of school to learn your students' names and interests? How will you incorporate that into your class? The intention here is really to come up with some really good ideas, share them, tweak them. Say, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. I love that. But you know what would be really cool? Let's add this. And somebody might say, oh, you know what? I tried that last year. That didn't work so well for me, but I did this. So you might come out with really great things. The purpose of these breakout rooms is for you to have meaningful conversation. So I encourage you to participate with your colleagues. Please pause the video now. Okay, welcome to Module 3, Teacher-Student Relationships from a Distance. So our learning intentions for today for Module 3 are all cut off the screen again. Okay, I'm learning the value of student-teacher relationships and the maintenance of those relationships in distance learning. I'm learning about my role in creating an environment in which students feel comfortable to make errors. I am learning about the design of distance learning experiences. Again, like I said earlier, these learning intentions, they appear for every module. They're phrased in a way that makes the students take ownership about what it is that they're doing. It also gives them clear direction as to where the lesson will be going. Success criteria for today, again, is off the screen. I can describe characteristics of valuable student-teacher relationships. I can use the elements of teacher-student relationships in my interaction with students. I leverage my relationships to create an environment in which errors are valued. I recognize the sign of a chilly classroom and work to avoid that feeling. I redouble my efforts to reach the hard-to-reach students. I can design systems that increase touch points for students virtually. These are all things that at the end of this module, you should be able to confidently say that you can do. No significant learning occurs without significant relationship. I've said it, this is going to be a word that you're going to hate hearing from me, but relationships are so important, and I believe they're the foundation to education. This is true. No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. Think about it. Think of your personal educational career. Think about the classes you loved to be in, the classes maybe where you learned the most. What's the same through all of those? What I would like you to do now is, again, take a moment in the chat to quickly write the name of the most influential teacher that you had throughout your educational career. Give them a shout out. Then write what it was about them briefly that had an impact on you. I know that my teacher, my 11th grade history teacher, Bridgewater Raritan High School, Mr. Mahoney, he changed the way I thought about school entirely. I hated history, and now I am, as a result of his class, I was a history teacher, and I just can't get enough of it. So all of these teachers in our lives have had an impact. You have had an impact on students, some of which you may not even realize. But I want you to just take a second, think about it. It probably won't take you long. Everybody knows it right off the bat. To write the name of the most influential teacher that you had throughout your career, and then why in the chat now. Principals, please pause. Mind frames of visible learning. Teacher-student relationships form the heart of learning, and great teachers embody these principles. I'm not going to read this list to you. You're perfectly capable to do that. However, I do want to point out that there are things on this list that are evident in every effective classroom. Collaboration, assessment, willingness to change, willingness to believe that all your students are capable of being successful, understanding that learning is hard work. Even though if this is you teach a content that always came easy to you, it doesn't have to come easy to everybody, and you need to be able to understand that. I think maybe the most important bullet on here is that relationships and trust take time. And I think we all have to be willing to put in the time to be able to build those relationships and understand that those relationships have to be built in a way that they're not easily broken. Students can mess up, they can misbehave, they can disappoint you, but that the relationship that you form with them is strong. Here, I would like you again to jump into the chat. What are your quality indicators for a positive and productive teacher-student relationship? How do you know that the relationship that you have with your students is a meaningful one, one that fosters trust in your classroom, one that allows them to feel like they can make mistakes and it's okay, something that makes them feel safe? What are your indicators for a positive and productive student-teacher relationship? Principals, please pause here. Now, remember the other day when we talked about positive teacher-student relationships and how I made mention that it's very clear when when a student perceives that a teacher doesn't like them, as does the rest of the class. Here are things that make students feel that you care, that you like them as individuals. Teacher empathy, understanding, unconditional positive regard. That's a warmth. That's, you know what, I know you didn't study for your test. You forgot this, you bombed it. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're not a good person. Sometimes we have kids that really beat themselves up over things that they shouldn't. So for them to know that you're there and you still think as highly of them is very important. Genuineness, your self-awareness. Are you being who you are? You know, teachers sometimes try to do things to make class sometimes more interesting or silly or whatever, but the kids know if that's not who you are. They're the first ones to pick it up. So who are you? Do you portray that to the students? Non-directivity, that's student-initiated and student-regulated activities, student-centered learning, not all lecture and teacher learning or teacher-centered teaching. Also, encouragement of critical thinking as opposed to traditional memory emphasis. So kids love when you actually have them do. You know, if you say, what year was the American Revolution? They could spit that out to you. But if you say, okay, well, what does the American Revolution have to do with the political culture of today or the climate of today? Or have them really think about connections. How does things that happened a million years ago affect their lives today? How is this math that you're teaching them, how is that going to be used in real life? Or why is this important for them to know? When you talk about those types of things, it builds these types of relationships. 5 questions for distance learning. How are your students going to know? How are they going to seek connections to you? How are they going to see that you're empathetic to them? How are they going to know that you care about them as people? Okay. How do they know that you care about yourself as a professional? This may be in the way you come across virtually. Are you dressed professionally? Do you speak professionally? Are you prepared for class? Are you just winging it? They can tell. So how are you carrying yourself as a professional? How do they know you hold their abilities in high regards? So by turning class over to them, by saying, okay, This is what we're talking about. I'm going to get you in groups, or I'm going to turn you loose for 5 minutes, and you're going to see if you could find the answer to this question, or you're going to write your thoughts down about A, B, and C. Now, not only did you acknowledge that you care about what it is that they're thinking, you're giving them that freedom to engage in it. And how will your students know that you foster deep learning? Again, that's critical thinking. It's performance-based assessments, project-based assessments, project-based learning, problem-based learning. All of those types of things encourage critical thinking. Again, when you receive the book on page 51, there's a whole bunch of charts all throughout the book that are really useful. I used to I used to tell my students that they can't Google read, just look at the stuff in the middle and leave the stuff along the outsides alone, like where all the ads are on the computers, that you have to look at everything. The charts have really good resources. They have really good questions and ideas for you. Here's one about establishing or reestablishing relationships that you have with students in a distance learning environment. So you go through these, and how are you going to make sure that your students know these things? Peer relationships are influenced by teacher-student interactions. Positive relationships are maintained when teachers set fair rules, fair expectations, when there's classroom management that is predictable. They rely on effective communication, and they're not destroyed, again, like I said, when problematic behavior occurs. So students need to know all of these things and who you are, and that this classroom is safe so that they can make mistakes. Now, we make mistakes as educators. I've tripped over my words 18 million times since this started. I also had to fix my slides. I left those things in there on purpose, and the reason I left them in there is because it's okay for things not to be perfect. Nobody expects perfection. What we do expect, and what you, I'm assuming, expect of yourself is good teaching and reaching out to those students. So you make a mistake, we move on. Kids make a mistake, we move on. If they see you make mistakes, they know it's okay. So having kids say, are you sure you did those calculations right? Or is that date right? Or that's not the character's name in this book. Silly things like that. If they just become a whoops, no big deal, that's okay. I read once that there was a teacher who had a whoops board in the back of the room, and basically they put up all like the famous inventions, like Post-its, that weren't supposed to be invented, but there were great things that happened because of a mistake. And then by the end of the year, the students started putting their own whoopses up on the board. And the teacher, whenever they made a mistake, she'd also post it up on the board too. So it was embracing those things, because that's how you learn. You learn by making mistakes. So the other day we talked about the scale of things that affect student achievement in a classroom. Students feeling disliked has a reverse effect on learning. In fact, it's one of the few effects out of more than 250 plus influences that actually reverses learning. A teacher's dislike for a student is rarely a secret to their classmates. Think about it. They watch you day after day. They get really good at being able to read your facial expressions, your physical body expressions. They watch how you interact with these students verbally and non-verbally, and how you interact with other students in the classroom. What you're doing is modeling how peers should interact with that student. So there was research done by Birch and Ladd that says students who are disliked by the teacher are more readily rejected by peers than those who are liked by the teacher. This phenomenon is called social referencing, and it's especially influential among children who turn to adults to decide who they like and who they don't. In distance learning, your actions and your nonverbals are still very, very visible to everybody to see and hear. So you're on close-up, your reactions are noticeable. You have to keep that in mind. Everybody can see when you look away or stop listening to a student, or if you decide to mute their microphone. So your negative relationship with the students has two possible outcomes. One, The first is that the peers take the same kind of dislike to the student, and that's especially true in the elementary grades. And the second is that they take a dislike to you because they do like this student, and now they feel like you're targeting that student. And any student who doesn't like you makes your job that much harder. It's far more challenging to learn from someone you don't like than it is from someone that you do. Remember, relationships are important. This all has an effect on the culture of your classroom. It's sometimes called a chilly classroom climate. It's where students feel that they are not valued and where their existence is at best peripheral and at worst an unwelcome intrusion. There's differential teacher treatment of low achieving students. What you see more often is that they're more often criticized for failure, they're praised less frequently, they receive less feedback, they're called on less often, they have less eye contact from the teacher, fewer friendly interactions with the teacher, and experience acceptance of their ideas less often. Now, with that being said, there may be an unconscious reason for this. One speculation is that we became teachers because we wanted to see students succeed. And if we have students that are struggling or are disruptive in the classroom, we subconsciously avoid contact with them. We sometimes view them as lower achieving, and we want to see the success in our students. So it's a subconscious thing. It's not necessarily something that has been intended. But when you look at it from the opposite direction, students that you see being high achieving, they get our attention more contact, more interactions, and frequent interactions that are growth producing. So be careful with that mute button because it's a great tool if things get out of hand, but it's also a new way to send negative messages to low achieving students. A student who may get you off topic by asking so many questions and you say, okay, that's enough, mute and move on. Now you're telling that student that what they think doesn't matter, or their success doesn't matter, or their questions don't matter, or their experience in your classroom or their voice doesn't matter. So you need to be really careful with that mute button. A good way to avoid instances like this is to set up those norms that we talked about earlier. If you have additional questions, or say, if you have additional questions, let's meet after class. Let's just have a conversation and talk about it. Because if you just start muting students, what you're going to see is that they're not going to ask questions. They're not going to achieve, and their relationship with you is going to be damaged. So let's try to flip the narrative. Very easy. Those students that you perceive as difficult or hard to reach or low achieving, figure out a way to reach them through different teacher actions. So think about it. Did you greet them when they walked into your classroom? Do you know something about their personal life that you can engage them in conversation? If you take 2 minutes every day to talk to that student, whether it's sending an email, checking in, hey, I know you said that you were looking forward to the Yankees game the other day. I didn't catch it. Did they win? Things like that, they're huge strides. It builds relationships, and those kids will eventually start to come around. Think about the praise that you offer. Are you offering the low achieving students enough praise, same as you would for the students that you perceive as high achieving? Did you give them a compliment? Michael, I got your work. Let me tell you what. Holy moly, that was awesome. Do you have to do it privately? You can. Could you do it in front of the class? Yeah, depends on Michael and your relationship with him and his personality. If he has a personality where he's easily embarrassed, then I wouldn't do that. That would be a personal conversation, but it builds trust and it builds relationships. Increase your virtual touch points with all students. So what does that mean? Have a system for calling on students and noticing who hasn't participated. There's a lot of times when we look at the classroom and we ask questions, hands shoot up. Wait time is sometimes gone by the wayside, and we wind up calling on the same kids over and over and over again. Have a system to track who it is that's speaking, who is it that you've called on. maybe just a roster, maybe it's just a highlighter or a check or a tick mark, anything that allows you to see who's participating and who's not. That's very telling. It tells you who understands the information, uh, who is perhaps just a little bit shy or maybe has something going on, because usually somebody talks all period long and participates, and for the last 2 days hasn't said anything. So maybe that warrants an additional check-in. You could do this a whole bunch of different ways. So yes, I said the roster. You could also use the craft sticks where you just pull them out. It's a good visual for people in your class as well as in the virtual space. You could do a pass it on. So I used to call it, if you ever watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I would say, okay, phone a friend if somebody had trouble. Okay, now pick somebody else. Or I would say, I'd ask a question and I'd say, oh, Sarah, here's the question. I want you to think about it. Okay, great. Sarah, now ask somebody else in the room too to think about the same question. So that person now had a heads up, right? So Sarah answers the question and then she calls on the second person. The second person is then required to either do one of two things: agree or disagree with what Sarah said, or add on. Now they can't just say, oh, I agree, because what's the use of that? I agree because I think this is true, of blah, 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 blah. I agree because I feel that I've had the same experience. It works with anything. That could work with stories. It could work in history. It could work in math. You put up a problem and say, okay, show me this. Okay, call on somebody else. Is this correct? No? Why? Where do we fix it? So you're turning the learning over to them. Make sure every live session includes whole group and small group discussions. Make all the voices heard. How do you do that? Again, keep track of who it is that's talking. Curtail your lecture time. Make sure that they're the ones that are doing the most talking, not you. Older students can also be assigned to develop questions. I would sometimes give my students the opportunity to create questions for a test or for a quiz. Now, I didn't use all of their questions. Some of them were just downright silly, as I'm sure you can imagine. But they can come up with questions too, based on conversations that you've had, or activities that have been done in class. If you assign discussion boards, participate in them. If you put up a question and say, what do you think about this? Make sure that you respond to the students' thoughts. Otherwise, they think they're just doing it for nothing. And use pop-up pedagogy. I love this. Pop-up pedagogy to increase touch points across the week. So, what's pop-up pedagogy? Think about when you're on the computer and these things you get those pop-up ads, when the computer seemingly reads your mind. And it's like, oh, I was just thinking about that. Do the same thing for your kids. Make it relatable. Put it into their court, okay? So if you're teaching a lesson, make that connection with your students so that when they're out in their real world, okay, which is sometimes different than our real world, but when they're out in their real world and they see something, they think about what it is you talked about in class. So I'm going to draw on my own teacher experience here. I used to teach about the Cold War, and I would show the students the sign for the fallout shelters that you would see outside of all of the buildings. And one of my students went on vacation up to Boston and came back on Monday morning and was like, Mrs. Wozlik, you'll never believe it. They had them all over the place. And she was so excited that it was awesome for me, because I know that not only did she hear what we were talking about in class, but she was living it. She saw it. And what I said to her in those class periods transferred outside into her real life. She probably would never have noticed them had we not gone over it in class. But now all of a sudden it was something that was relevant to her. So that was exciting. You can also incorporate pop-up pedagogy in other ways. One is foreshadowing upcoming content with an intriguing question. Ever wonder why your cell phone battery dies? We'll discuss this on Thursday. Bring your ideas. Have them really think, again, reaching out into their world. They're connected to that cell phone in ways many of us never were at their age. So these are interesting things for them. So we have to draw on that. You could also post students, if there's permissions, of your students with their assignments, or you can also post pictures of what their assignments should look like. One example that I read that they talk about in the book is that there was a home ec class and students made French toast. It was a middle school home ec class, and they made French toast, and their assessment was to post the picture of them making it at different stages, kind of like a cooking channel type of thing, and then also to have two people review their recipes. So it's creative. It's doing things that might have been outside the box, not things that you normally would have done if you were just in the classroom yourself. You can also personalize directions for assignments by making either short videos or just clips again of still pictures of how to go through something to do them. That is really effective for students who might have a hard time following lists of directions. They can go back and listen to you multiple times, say exactly what it is they need to be doing. It might be good for students with some learning disabilities or ELL students who are learning the language. That's a great opportunity and a great tool for them. So we're coming to the end, and I'm going to put you in a breakout room for one last time. What is your pop-up pedagogy plan to stay connected with families? So again, your principals are going to put you into rooms. These are the room assignments in case you need them again. Your principals, again, will put you in these rooms and determine the amount of time for your breakout room. But the question again is, what is your pop-up pedagogy plan to stay connected with families? Principals, please pause now. I just want to take a second to thank you for your participation, for your collaboration today, and for your ideas and feedback. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via email. My email is listed at the bottom of the slide. I hope you all have a great day.